Good evening, everybody. We are very excited about tonight's episode of Midweek in the City. I'm so glad that you have been able to join us for the past few weeks as we have gotten to know Megan, as we have talked about the existence of God. We are going to dive right on in this week, tonight in fact, to the subject of joy. Joy seems to be rather elusive this season. Maybe you've noticed that. And so we're going to see where we can search the world over to find that and how we would know it, in fact, if we did find it. Joining us tonight, remotely from Waco, is Dr. Angela Gorrell. And she is a professor of practical theology at Truett Seminary. And she has a forthcoming book called The Gravity of Joy. So we're going to see what she means by that title and, in fact, what she means by the word joy. It might be a little bit unexpected, so stay tuned for that. And Megan, welcome. I'm glad you're here too.
Thank you.
So let's do this.
Yeah, Dr. Gorrell, thank you for joining us. I think this is such perfect timing for our church. We're in a series on joy. We're going through Philippians, and I think that series alone is timely for what we're going through right now in 2020. Right. And your work just fits in perfectly to that. And so would you just tell us, just to get started, how did you come to study joy? How did you come to this topic?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me with you. From Waco. I'm really delighted to be talking with both of you this morning and with everyone that's going to be listening. In 2016, in March of 2016, I was hired at the Yale Center for Faith and Culture at Yale University to be a part of the Theology of Joy and the Good Life Project. So it was going to be my job post my PhD studies at Fuller Theological Seminary to study joy for 3 years. And I, to be honest, at the time, I just thought, is there any better thing? Basically, everyone, that I talked to, especially when I would be on planes or, kind of casually talking to someone that didn't know me, and they'd ask me, what do you do? I would say, oh, I'm a researcher at Yale. Well, what do you research? Currently, joy. People would be like, I want more of it.
Yeah, really.
So how do I get it?
Yeah, that actually sounds like one of those, we all could use a little more good news. We need more researchers in the area of joy. I mean, that just it sounds almost like something made up, that somebody would make up. But anyway, that's awesome. I mean, I don't mean to denigrate that. I just mean it's almost too good to be true.
Yeah, and I felt that way. I felt really, really incredibly privileged to be able to be on that team. And to spend 3 years thinking about such an important subject in people's lives, and also an important subject theologically, an important subject for Christianity. The priest Alexander Schmemann contends that joy is the tonality of Christianity. It's how it sounds. And I think, so for me, in the last few years, I've started to really understand why the joy is so important, especially in times of suffering and despair, like 2020 is for so many people. Yeah. But basically, 8 months into studying joy at Yale, 3 tragedies happened in my family back to back. So on December 18th, 2016, like I said, 8 or 9 months into working on the Joy Project, one of my family members died by suicide at 30 years old. And he had, at the time, 2 very small children that were 2 and 6. And then, my husband and I were really the people who were called upon in our family to be a pastoral presence that entire week with our family. So it was only months afterwards that I was able to realize how much I had not really been able to engage my own sense or feelings about what had happened, because I was trying really hard to help my family through it, and planning the funeral, speaking at the funeral, all those sorts of things. And then I got back to New Haven, Connecticut, which is where Yale is, where I was living at the time. And I just thought, wow, this is gonna, after my family member Dustin's funeral, I thought, wow, this is gonna be really hard to recover from. And this is gonna cause profound grief. And this is gonna take some healing work in my life and our family's life, and a week and a half after Dustin's funeral, my nephew died at 22 years old of sudden cardiac arrest. So then I found myself flying to Albuquerque, New Mexico, where my oldest sister lives, and being with all my sisters around Steph's counter in her house for multiple days, like 3 or 4 days. 3 nights straight till 4 or 5 in the morning, just trying to just be with Steph and walk with her through this, like, what is the most horrible thing that's ever happened to her. Spoke at Mason's funeral. I helped her write his obituary and spoke at his funeral on that Saturday. And then got back to New Haven on a Sunday night. And on Tuesday night, I was messaged and told that my dad had just gone to the emergency room and he was fighting for his life. And so on Thursday morning, I got on 3 different planes. That's what it took to get to Eastern Kentucky. My dad lived in Pikeville. So it took 3 planes and an hour and a half car ride in a rented car to get to my dad. And my dad died on Thursday night. And then I did my dad's funeral the following Tuesday, excuse me. But basically in about 4.5 weeks, I spoke at 3 funerals of 3 people that I loved. My dad died after 12 years of opioid use. His liver and kidneys shut down, complicated by pneumonia. So I found myself in 2017, in February, March 2017, just overwhelmed by grief, overwhelmed by suffering. I found myself encountering America's crisis of despair, both in its suicide rates currently and also in its opioid crisis. Like, I found myself personally feeling those things, and then the sudden loss of my nephew, all this, and for the first 8 months that I worked at Yale, I read everything I could on joy. I was so excited to be there, as we were just talking about. And then I found myself in mid 2017, like, finding it to be unfathomable, just even like reading about joy, not alone expressing it myself. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
That sounds like something that would just bend you to the ground. I don't think I've heard a concussive blast of grief that intense ever in somebody's life. It's shocking, actually, to hear you say that, to hear you say all of these things, and deeply sorrowful. Is this, and I guess I've got a list of questions here, but your story has already gone off-road here in my own mind, and that is, Angela, first of all, how did you even climb back into that project? And secondly, did joy look different to you after that time? And I'm thinking about something that you can understand versus something that you can wear. That's only language I guess I can put on that. But so I guess how did you get back to facing the project, and then what did it look like to you?
Megan, did you have something to add to that?
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Just go ahead. Okay. I didn't know if you were about to ask something as well. Absolutely. This experience totally shifted my understanding of joy. And I do have to say that initially when we started doing this project, we got some critical feedback from other people, from other scholars who were kind of wondering, like, study joy in 2016, isn't that a little shallow, a little trivial? Because even back then in 2016, we were having one of the most polarized sort of moments in
Yes.
U.S. history.
Right.
And so people were looking at us, I think, and I began, so after this happened to me, I really started to feel similarly, like, joy is not what I need to be studying right now. And so, and I really couldn't. I mean, honestly, for most of 2017 and for half of 2018, I didn't write myself about joy. I went to the consultations, I did my job, but it was very hard. And I described in the Gravity of Joy with a lot of honesty that grief process and how hard it was. I described the fear that follows having 3 people that you love die in rapid succession. I described the anger that I felt, which were really important emotions that I had to walk through that were part of the grief process. It's important for everyone to know that I had 6 months of therapy for post-traumatic stress, like that, it's not like I woke up, suddenly one day and just started like writing and, being able to talk about this the way that I am right now. Yeah. This is the fruit of a lot of inner work, of spiritual direction, of therapy, of pastoral care.
I'm so,
fruit of,
if I may say, I'm so glad to hear that, because often that remains behind the curtain and people wonder, they're mystified. They go, that's not for me, or that would crush the life out of me. So I guess I'm not, one of the strong people. And to hear you say that is the exact opposite of that kind of assessment.
Yeah, and I definitely, so in the book, I really try to honor all the different sorts of things that came together to bring bits of healing into my life over the last 3.5 years. And that journey still continues, especially for my family, my other family members as well. Like, all of us are on different sort of places, in different places with our journeys of healing. And I really am very grateful to my family members for their willingness to allow me to tell my story, because in doing so, I implicated them and told their stories as well. And we're all at different places in how we feel about these things and in our reflections. So basically in May 2018, I signed up to be on a Bible on a team that was leading a Bible study at a women's maximum security prison. I had been feeling in my spirit for years before that maybe at some point in my life that I would do ministry inside the walls of a prison. And it was one day at church that they said, hey, we need more people to serve on this team. And I just felt that thing, that Holy Spirit nudge in your gut that's like, I need to respond to this. I was at the end of myself. I had nothing to offer anyone. I was in the midst of very profound grief. And honestly, I had not really prayed that much in the year prior because I felt like, I describe it in the book as this 2017 was my Elijah moment. I had walked out on the side of the mountain and I was waiting for God to pass by. I wanted God to be big and obvious. I wanted God to be wind and fire and earthquake. I wanted God to be loud. And instead, I experienced sheer silence. And I have come to understand in hindsight that I do believe that God was with me in the midst of that sheer silence, that is where God was. But that is not a comfortable place to be. And so it's kind of wild. It's God's grace that I decided that I responded to this. I really feel like it was both, I was receptive to this invitation, but it absolutely was, I think, God's work in my life. And I go on the first night to the prison, and immediately the pain of the women in the space was palpable. The woman who sat next to me, Gloria, her arm actually rested against mine because the seats were all really close together in the circle. And she had scars up and down her arm from self-harm. So the moment I'm sitting in the room, like the suffering of people is palpable, it's real, it's very obvious. And Gloria had been struggling really badly with her own her own grief over the previous months. And she's the first person to talk. It's my first night here again. And she says that she's really struggling with wanting to die by suicide because she's had a child in the prison a few months before, and she's missing her baby very badly. The circumstances, she ended up having her baby in a prison cell. That's a whole nother conversation about how we treat people who live in prisons in the United States, how we treat people who are incarcerated. That's also in the book, I think a lot about that. But basically her suffering is so evident to me. And that visceral, like pastoral, like human side of me just immediately feels like I had told the team, on this first night, I'm just going to observe. But when she started sharing her story, I said to her, Gloria, like, can I pray for you? Just like out loud, and she said, yes, and so I prayed over her, and it was like the first honest, like outright, God, I really believe that you're there. I really need you to hear what we're praying on behalf of Gloria tonight. It was just this prayer that flowed out of me. And I began to realize over the coming weeks how this space of honesty, of sharing emotions, of facing our suffering together was beginning to help me to be in touch with what I was really going through in a way that nothing else had. And so as I began to honestly confront the anger and the fear and the profound grief of the year and a half before with these women who were also honest, always honest about, I say in the book, nothing is half-baked in prison. That's why I felt so alive there. So I'll just finish by saying there were a few months later, Gloria walks into the Bible study. And she's one of the first women there that night. And she says, Angela. And I said, hey, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. And she's like, today is my birthday. And I said, oh my goodness, Gloria, that's awesome. How old are you? She said, I'm 21 today. And I said, wow, happy birthday. I said, I know you love music. What if you pick the song that we sing tonight, the first song that we sing together? And I'm telling y'all, nothing is like there is nothing like singing in this for the Bible study that we were in. But Gloria, so everybody sits down. There's a bunch of people there that night, 25, 30 women. We're all sitting down. Gloria picks the song, I Know I've Been Changed. And when we sing this song, we stand up, and women are, Brooklyn is there that night, and she's helping people to, she's leading the song, and she has different women doing the different parts. And I look around the room and I just realized at one point, like everyone is jumping up and down, where like people are raising their hands, people are singing with everything that they have. And then I look at Gloria and she is just jumping. I've never seen her jump so high. I've never seen her be so caught up in the moment. It was just so beautiful. And I felt so happy, so joyful that I'm like watching her do this. And we sit down and she begins to weep. Gloria weeps so loudly. So, it is like that there's no way I could continue to go on with the Bible study. So I'm just listening to her cry so loudly, and it becomes really uncomfortable in the room. And we say to Gloria, people begin saying things that we want to say when people are crying, like, I'm so sorry that you're so sad. I know you want to be near your family and your birthday. I know that you're going through a hard time. Like, we love you. We're here for you. And I just do what I did on the first night that I met her. Like, can I pray for you? I pray this prayer. I feel like it's the right time to pray and everything. And I get done praying and say amen. And I look and Gloria's like this. And I'm like, Gloria, do you want to say something? And she's like, I'm not sad. I'm not sad. I have never, ever felt God's presence like I did just now during that song. I have never felt God like that. I'm not sad. I'm overwhelmed with joy.
Yeah.
And I sat there and I just, so everyone knows, like, I can't tell any of these women what I do for a living. To this day, not one of them knows that I was a professor at Yale. Nobody knew that I was a pastor or I was ordained. Nobody knew that I was researching joy. And that's a whole lesson in itself. To actually enter into spaces where we have to leave all those labels and all that stuff behind is really good for all of us. But she didn't know that I was researching joy. And it was in that moment that my ministry, my faith, and my doubt and my research collided. And the gravity of joy is the fruit of that collision.
That's incredible, Dr. Gorrell. Thank you for sharing that story with us. And what a gift that we have this book to hear some of those things that you just talked about. I mean, that's incredible. Thank you for sharing that story with us and being so vulnerable to share that. That's incredible. Yeah.
Silence is now officially a part of Midweek in the City. I'm just telling you that. What then? What is the truth then about the dance between grief and joy, Angela? Do we have to take them together? I mean, what is that interrelationship there?
Mm-hmm.
Can you help us? Can you light that path a little bit? I mean, you have been, but can you say even more about that?
Yeah, so joy is not dependent on sorrow, but joy can live in close proximity to sorrow. Joy can live in the midst of suffering. It doesn't need suffering to exist. It doesn't need sorrow to exist, but it can. The good news for all of us in 2020 is that it is able to be felt and expressed in the midst of deep sorrow and suffering. In Ezra Chapter 3, they're watching the temple be rebuilt. It's a strange passage. I say in the book that Ezra is one of those Bible books that we often neglect or we don't talk about a lot because it seems pretty boring to many of us.
Yeah.
And they're watching a temple rebuilt, which is basically like watching paint dry, And so you're like, what? But here's the thing. I'm listening to this passage one morning in our devotionals at the Yale Center for Faith and Culture. We always started our day with devotionals together and prayer. And I'm listening to this passage and it says they're watching the temple be rebuilt. And some people are watching it and they're rejoicing. They're overjoyed that the temple is being rebuilt. And there's shouts of joy in the space. But there are other people who are watching it be rebuilt and they're crying and weeping because they remember the old temple. They remember what used to be.
Yeah.
It says it's hard to distinguish the sounds of joy from the sounds of weeping in Ezra 3. I think that in 2020, that's especially true for many of us. I think that, and that for me, theologically speaking, biblically speaking, is how I make sense of joy's ability to live and share space, share the same air as sorrow and suffering. In suffering, we deeply long for that which is good, truthful, meaningful. We deeply long for connection with others. So when we sense those things, when we recognize something that is good, truthful, meaningful, our connection with other people, and we feel that deeply, the effect of that is joy.
Okay.
And so I think that that's especially why in suffering, when we recognize, oh my goodness, even though things are really difficult, even though in Gloria's case, her circumstances had not changed, she recognized the goodness of God. She found meaning in the midst of the moments she was living in. She felt connected to the Spirit of God, and the effect of that for her was joy. I say in the book that because joy is God, because it is the feeling that we get from God ministering to us, joy can always find you.
Oh. Joy can always find you. Okay, that's so beautiful. And another beautiful thing is your pointing out the little side comment in Ezra which I've read many times, but this little side comment, but I never thought of it as anything more than a little offhand remark that he was not just saying, the author was not just saying cacophony was the result. It was just chaotic noise. That was really a theological statement, probably, or conceivably it was a theological statement that about the, as you say, the proximity, the close proximity, or that joy has with sorrow. I just love that. And Megan, if you'll permit me, just one more question here, and that is, what has to be the case if a suffering person is going to realize joy? Joy can find you, but what is the what's the activating mechanism that allows a suffering person to be reached by joy? And maybe that's, I'm thinking of somebody who is in the dark, and what has to be the case for that person to avail herself or himself of joy, or to be reached by joy? Is how can that happen? I mean, you just told us how it could happen. I guess I'm thinking out loud here, but
I do. I think so. I feel like that there are both obstacles to joy and gateways to joy.
Okay, and I guess that's what I'm.
Yeah, and I
here.
do. More than anything, what I think is that we can be postured. We can be ready for joy. We can be open to joy. I don't think that we can make joy like we make spaghetti.
Sure.
That's an important thing for me to say, is that I do think we can choose to rejoice. We can choose to find good or meaning or truth or a connection we have with someone else or something that's beautiful, and we can meditate on it and choose actively, like, I'm going to rejoice over this. Like, that can be a choice. But the feeling, that the effect of joy, the feeling of joy, we can't just choose to feel joyful.
Right. Because feelings don't work like that, do they?
Right, they don't work like that,
Yeah.
right? But so there are obstacles to joy, which it's really important. Anyone who's in the dark, anyone who's experiencing the sheer silence that I experienced in 2017 right now, it's important for them to know that we have to learn to befriend emotions like fear and anger and grief.
Yeah.
Right? We have to be able to, because when we are, where there is fear, there can't be joy. Where there is anger, there cannot be joy. Where there is profound lament, it is difficult for joy to be recognizable to us. You know, because joy is the presence of God, it is near to us. And that's the very promising thing, that in the midst of despair, that we can have hope that joy is near. The great theologian Jürgen Moltmann, he says that hope is the anticipation of joy. Yeah. Right? And so I think that first people just need to know that it's very important to find groups of people, spaces where we can openly share and talk about our anger, our fear, our lament, and actually befriend those things and ask, what is this teaching me? What is my anger? What is the wisdom? Because there is wisdom behind every emotion. And the question is, there's not wisdom in giving way and just not, allowing emotions to overtake us, but there's wisdom in every emotion. So we want to ask, what is your wisdom? What are you teaching me about, anger in my own life? What are you teaching me, fear? Those sorts of things. And then there are also gateways to joy. It's like setting another seat at the dinner table. You're having dinner with people, and you kind of set an extra seat before the pandemic, perhaps, or after it. And you said, I don't know if people used to do this, and maybe you have a grandma that did this, but they'd always kind of set an extra seat at the table, kind of just anticipating that someone else who they might not have expected is going to come. That's how joy is. We kind of learn in our lives to set another seat at the dinner table and say, okay, God, I am going to live with the expectation, with the hope, with the anticipation that at any moment joy can find me, that I will even if I'm feeling disconnected from goodness, from meaning, from truth, from other people, from what is beautiful in the world, like I want to live in such a way as to anticipate that I won't feel this way forever. And then the gateways to joy, gratitude is an incredible gateway to joy. When we choose to think about the things that for which we can be grateful and rejoice over those things, that can be very helpful. Contemplating nature or art can be incredible ways to joy because they help us, they give us this sense that there's something more than the story that we are living.
Yeah.
And that's a very important thing, right? In the midst of the story that we're living, that's why the Bible, I think, has the power that it has still today, is that it reminds us that even in the midst of the very difficult things in our personal or familial lives, that there is a larger, bigger story that is being told, and that my story is wrapped up, thanks be to God, in the midst, in that larger story.
Yeah. And what I hear you saying is if the church would just choose to lean in, whether that's into lament together, especially in this year, if the church would choose to lean into those things, because my natural tendency is to move as far away from that emotion as possible and to, whatever that looks like, numbing out to that, choosing to ignore that. But if the church would do the opposite and lean into the messy or the difficult and be able to lament together, to find joy in that, but then also on the other side to choose to expect things from God, instead of, not, like you said, not setting an extra seat at the table, not leaving room for expectation, and choosing to lean into that and choosing to believe things from God.
That your word numb there is interesting because we do tend to push some emotions away in a numbing way. And you're saying you said there is wisdom in every emotion, and then before that, you said something that to the effect of learning to welcome. What was it you said? Learning to welcome emotions or embrace them, or I don't know what. Yeah. I can't remember.
I said befriend.
Befriend. Yes, to befriend them. That's not numbing them or ignoring them. And I have been there many times, Megan, of numbing or turning away. Let's not focus on that right now because it's painful.
Yeah.
But that's not. That itself, I guess, could be an obstacle to joy.
Right, because when we numb those emotions, often like we also are numbing the positive emotions as well. When we want to escape life rather than engage with it,
yes,
that we escape it all.
Right. Because we can't target the anesthesia, if you will. I mean, we are either numb or we're not.
Yeah. And we've talked a little bit about the theology of joy and how you've kind of constructed so much of your work around that. What have you learned about joy from the crucifixion? Like in Hebrews 12:2, it says it was for the joy set before him that he endured the cross. What have you learned, or what can we glean about joy from the passion, from the life of Jesus?
Yeah, so I talk in the book about different kinds of joy. And so I've talked already with you all a little bit about a kind of joy that Alexander Schmemann talked about I quoted him at the beginning, a priest.
Yes.
In one of his journals, he uses a phrase called bright sorrow. And I think there is a kind of joy that is a bright sorrow. It's the kind of joy that follows dead things being brought back to life, broken things being repaired. It is the joy that follows, an apology. It is the joy that follows the sense that of realizing that we have been redeemed, whether by someone else or by God, through someone else. And then, but then there are other kinds of joy too. And I think one that's important to name as well is the idea of retrospective joy. So in the midst of really difficult experiences or times of suffering, we can recall to mind moments in our life when we have felt unspeakable joy, and we can call them to mind and we can meditate on them. We can try to go back to that experience that that feeling, that those moments, we can recall what it felt like to be in that space, who we were with, what it smelled like, what it felt like. And then we can meditate on it and sometimes recall that joy again, and sometimes even more acutely. And so retrospective joy, whether that's in a conversation with someone else where you share experiences of times that you felt joy and you meditate on those together, share those together, or you do it through journaling, do it through just closing your eyes and finding a comfortable space and doing that. That can be a way of getting us through really tough times as well. I actually learned about retrospective joy from Dustin's 6-year-old. It's a story if you want to hear it, but for another time. But then the kind of joy you're describing, Megan, that I think Jesus felt on the cross is what is a kind of futuristic joy. There is a kind of joy that comes from rejoicing over the way that things ought to be. It's the kind of joy that can be found in protest, that can be found when people, I think when people sing together in religious services, in Christian worship services, I think futuristic joy is often what we're expressing. It's the sense that things will, that we will once again know, realize, recognize, and by God's grace feel connected to that which is good or truthful or meaningful or beautiful.
Yeah.
And we will again. It's theologian Willie Jennings describes this kind of joy as a work of resistance against despair. And I think that that's very important for Christians to be thinking about in 2020 is how can we come together, whether in digital spaces or in physical spaces, distantly, through social distancing. How can we create spaces of joy where we are actually participating in the work of joy as a resistance against despair?
Yes. Yeah. That is one of the most profound things I've ever heard, that joy is actually diverse, that it has different kinds of faces. I've never thought about that. It's just not a monolithic thing. Mm-hmm. Futuristic joy, retrospective joy, bright sorrow.
Gathering joy. Joy is a work again of a
yes.
Work of resistance.
Of resistance. I mean, this is needful for people to hear, because people occupied different spaces at different times, and the kind of joy that will lift them will be the joy that is appropriate to that season or that space that they're in. So I've never heard that. Yeah. That's just ridiculously amazing.
Yeah. One of the things that has stuck with me most from my time at Truett was this idea of the already but not yet-ness of the kingdom of God. And I feel like that's what you're describing here, is that we're kind of living in that space, between the joy that is set before us, the joy that we're expectant for, but the joy that we've experienced, here on this earth so far. And living in that space is difficult, because there's this tragedy, and even just the things that we've experienced here in 2020, there's living in that space is so difficult. But the idea of joy as resistance or as expectation is just incredibly encouraging to me, especially, in the circumstances that we're in now.
Same here. This is. I have never. I don't know. This conversation on joy has stirred up more emotions than I can count right now. But I will say that this gateway idea seems to be I had written something actually in the questions, I guess, that we sent you about the man born blind from birth, and his disciples were looking at it, it seems, as an end point. How did this man end up like this? Who sinned? And Jesus seemed to be looking at it as a beginning and not an end point, we're here, but where can we go from here? And they they were seeing it as he's here. How did he end up here? And joy. There seems to be a connection there in something you're saying about joy, how it can train us, perhaps, to see what is open instead of seeing a closed door. We can begin to see where the open doors are. This happened so that you might see the glory of God. And so I'm trying to work that out in my head at this point.
Yeah. I know we're
we're
encroaching on our time.
Yeah,
but,
we're getting close here.
As we kind of think about this in terms of community, and even in the altered sense of community that we're in right now, where so much of it is virtual, but how can this deepening of our understanding of joy and this kind of joy that we've talked about today, how can that work amongst one another in the church and as a community? How can that allow us to grow as a community of believers? And how can we grow in that? How can it become a communal sense of joy? And I don't know if that makes sense, but
it does to me.
How can we grow in community and joy?
I think it starts with where you all are. You're already headed that way, because you're intentionally thinking about the place of joy in the midst of 2020, a year of profound suffering. Yeah. So I think that it really starts with the journey of trying to understand joy more deeply, trying to sit with each other. I think that there is something, whether it's in a digital space. I do this with my classes too. So it's in online. I mean, it's possible to do it both in person and online. But I think that it's the sort of thing. I think the most important thing a community could do is like yours, who's studying Philippians, who's thinking about joy, is to give people opportunities, or people to take the opportunity, to meet with other people online in digital spaces or socially distanced outside, and talk about the work of joy in their own life. When have they experienced unspeakable joy? And to share those experiences with each other.
That's good.
How, when, in what ways, how should things be? In light of our faith, in light of the teachings and the life of Jesus, what should we hope for? What is the place of suffering in a good life, in a Christian vision of a true flourishing life? It's important for people, I think, to take the concepts that you're talking about together week after week in churches, and to really ask those difficult questions of their own lives, and to share that with each other. And what we find is in the sharing that we naturally begin to befriend those difficult emotions. What we find in the sharing is that one person's experience of unspeakable joy can suddenly become ours. Because Gloria was overwhelmed with joy, joy is contagious. It's infectious. Yeah. When Gloria became overwhelmed with joy, we did too.
Yeah.
We couldn't help but to participate in it. So the beautiful thing about joy is that as we intentionally talk about it, share stories about it, about these different kinds, we engage with it, we look at there's so much scripture about joy. As we look at these things and reflect on it, and we will find that we're making room for it. And that we'll find that the more we talk about it with each other and intentionally focus on it, the more we will become open to it. And the more open to it we become, the more we will realize it around us,
Thank you. That is amazing. Did you want to say something else?
No,
okay. This is invaluable to us. And You're reminding us, as you did just now, that joy is actually contagious, is such a hopeful note, because it's not like we have to, as you said earlier, we can't force ourselves to feel joy, but we can catch it. We can be encountered by it and embraced by it, and it can find us like a pathogen, except except better. And so, but it is such a happy thing, really, to hear that and to be reassured that it can find its way to us, no matter where we are. But to be around it is very, very important. And I guess we could tell the difference between joy and a forced happiness if by whether or not it welcomes our sorrow into its midst. If it doesn't do that, then it's sort of a forced thing and it's not the real thing, which you helped us to see here too, that joy will befriend or it will teach us to befriend all these emotions. Could we coax you to come back during the spring? And I'm serious, for a larger conversation about the gravity of joy?
Absolutely. I would love that.
We would too, more so after this conversation. Oh, my word.
Yeah.
This is just amazing. Angela, thank you for your work.
Thank you.
And keep teaching us all how to recognize joy and how to be in a posture to receive it. Please keep teaching us that.
Yeah.
Thank you for being with us tonight. Really appreciate that. Thank you, everybody, for being a part of this project, this ongoing project, Midweek in the City. As always, please join the Zoom call now for a Q&A and dive into this thing with your whole heart. Okay? Thanks, everybody. Good night.
Thank you.